This is the second of series of 3 Sundays on the question of why does God allow evil and suffering? Last week we focused on the question of what it would be like to live in a world where good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. And we looked at the book of Job in the Bible. These days, many people argue that because there is so much evil and suffering in the world, there cannot be a good God at all. So today we focus on the question, if there is no God, does that solve the problem of evil and suffering? And next week I'm going to summarize the traditional Christian defenses of God against that accusation. So, the question at issue is basically whether the way the universe works is entirely unintended and accidental, or whether there is some kind of intending mind making it happen for some purpose. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, when I mention God, what I'm talking about is some kind of mind with an intention making the universe the kind of thing it is. That's all. I'm not going to talk about any other complications. So the question is there some kind of mind, some intention, some purpose up there? If there is such a God, why does God let us suffer as the result of natural processes? And why does God let us suffer as a result of other people's actions hurting us? If there is no God, natural processes cause things like illnesses and floods, but they don't intend to. No intending is going on at all. Everything that happens is accidental matter obeying the laws of nature. Depending on whether you believe in free will, you may think the same applies to moral evil as well. Now, the corollary of that is everything is equally accidental. The good bits as well as the bad bits. So, tomorrow, when your house is burgled, your children are murdered, and somebody hacks into your bank account all on the same day, you sit down in front of the television and you say to yourself, I'm feeling upset, but none of this matters. It's just people doing what they've evolved to do. And then on Tuesday, when you win the lottery and you pass all your exams and you meet your perfect life partner, again you say to yourself, so what? My hormones are getting excited, but none of it matters. In practice, the idea that nothing in the universe matters doesn't suit us. After all, the reason why people keep asking why God allows suffering is that suffering does matter. And if it matters, and if there is no God, the alternative is to say that somehow we create our own values. Now, to see how this works with pain and suffering, let's just make a few distinctions. In the 19th century, the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who sort of founded the idea of utilitarianism, he proposed a simple theory. All right and wrong should be based on the greatest happiness of the greatest number. He thought it should be possible to measure pain and pleasure and calculate whether a particular action would produce more pleasure than pain. So, an example. Last night you drank 10 pints of beer, didn't you? And that was, let's say, 20 units of pleasure. And this morning you woke up with a headache, 23 units of pain. So you compare the pain against the pleasure and you calculate whether it was worth doing. And Bentham hoped that one day it should be possible to make all moral decisions like that. Today, nobody thinks so. Pain is a physical sensation caused by your nerves. Whether or not there is a God, pain functions as a warning system. We don't create pain, it happens to us. But we all often have some control over how it affects us. Some people willingly accept pain for the sake of something they enjoy, climbing a mountain, playing football, whatever. Pleasure, on the other hand, is not a physical sensation. Pleasure is a condition of the mind. Pleasure has an opposite, which we can describe as displeasure or suffering. So, the relationship between suffering and pain is suffering can be caused by pain, but there are usually other considerations as well. Activities of the mind. Anxiety, despair, regret, guilt, shame, frustration. We all have these, don't we? So it involves a sense of time, including memory and anticipation when we suffer, and the capacity to imagine alternatives. So put all that together, and our suffering is more than just pain. It reflects our values. By a combination of nature and nurture at any one time, we all have a collection of values. And to some extent they're consistent with each other, but maybe not very much. People who believe in God usually think God has values, and the right values to have are the values God has. If there is no God, our values express the fact that we usually dislike pain, but apart from that, our suffering basically expresses our values. And our values are not right or wrong, they're just what we've ended up with. So, if you follow that so far, when it comes to suffering, not believing in God has two advantages. One is that there's nobody to blame for the way the world works. Everything is caused by impersonal laws of nature that didn't intend anything. The corollary is that fundamentally nothing matters at all. The other advantage is that apart from direct physical pain, we bring our suffering upon ourselves with the values we have. And because there is no right answer about our values, it's always possible to change them. Again, there's a corollary. Nobody has the right to say that one set of values is better than another. If we just all create our own values and there are no right answers, you may think that burglary is wrong, but the person who burgled your house just has different values, that's all, and nobody can say that one's better than the other. If your house is burgled, you may not want to reach that conclusion. You know, IS seems to think that beheading Christians is a good thing to do. Boko Haram strongly believe in abducting schoolgirls. In 1930s Germany, lots of people sincerely believed something needed to be done to get rid of the Jews. Now, these are kind of societies with values that are very different from ours. And in practice, nearly everyone presupposes, at least sometimes, that there must be a moral authority higher than society, so that we could say that some of these things really are wrong. I'm going to finish with just a couple of quotations. Did you hear or see Stephen Fry's recent interview about God in the Irish? Quite a few of you did. So he would have said to God, yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You would easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It's simply not acceptable, says Stephen Fry. What he would have said if there was a God, because God is clearly immoral. Well, I don't know what you made of it, but here's a question you can ask. Clearly Stephen Fry has moral standards. Now, it's not that he's made up these moral standards and God's standards are different. He's really saying to God, God jolly well ought to run the world in accordance with Stephen Fry's standards. Stephen Fry's standards are absolute. So that raises a question, well, where does he get them from? What is his moral authority? So that's the issue. Now, final example, this is one of the most commonly cited texts on the question, and I would hate, and it's on your sheet, I would hate to finish without mentioning it. It's Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Has anybody come across this? Yeah, quite a few of you have, yeah. Ivan Karamazov basically is responding to the traditional Christian argument that God allows people to hurt each other so that we can develop a sense of right and wrong. Now, I'm going to explore this further next week, but just at the moment, I just want to focus on what Ivan says. He describes a 5-year-old girl praying to God while being deliberately tortured by her parents. And Ivan addresses his brother, he's talking to his brother here. Do you understand why this infamy must be and is permitted? Without it, I am told, man could not have existed on earth, for he could not have known good and evil. Why should he know that diabolical good and evil when it costs so much? Why, the whole world of knowledge is not worth that child's prayer to dear, kind God. Well, again, this is quite a famous text now. Ivan's point is that a good God would not have allowed cruelty merely in order to let us understand the difference between good and evil. And again, we have a similar problem that we had with Stephen Fry. If we had never learnt to distinguish between good and evil, we wouldn't be troubled by acts of cruelty. We wouldn't consider them cruel. We'd be like cats chasing a mouse, playing with it. We get bothered about these things because we do distinguish between good and evil, and we care about it. So, there's a question for you. Is it worth it? We've got about a bit less than 10 minutes, and I'm hoping that in your groups you can just, spend a bit of time exploring these questions. I put down three other questions on your sheet. If you want to start with them, you can. How important is it to you to know where your values come from? Do you think we bring a lot of suffering on ourselves? And do you think some actions are absolutely wrong, or are all our moral judgments relative?